The Hebrew Bible contains many interesting and supernatural creatures, one of the most mysterious of these being the Nephilim, first introduced in Genesis 6:4. The Nephilim are described as heroes of old, men of renown, but the identity and origin of the Nephilim are still surrounded in mystery to this day. Some call them demons, some call them giants, but to find out who the Nephilim truly were and where they truly came from, I journeyed deep into the scriptures, and what I found out about these people is much more fascinating than I ever expected. You see, the word Nephilim, a Hebrew word meaning the fallen ones, only appears in the Bible 3 times. First in Genesis 6 verse 4, second in the book of Numbers, and third in a secret lesser known passage in Ezekiel. Based on these passages alone, we can't conclude much about the identity or origin of these creatures, but what we do know is this: the Nephilim were a race of giants. In the book of Numbers, the Israelites are on the cusp of entering the promised land, a land flowing with milk and honey, a symbol of abundance and plenty. But there's a problem. There are several Gentile nations occupying the land, enemies of Israel. So Moses elected 12 men and sent them out as spies into the promised land. When exploring, they reached the land of Hebron, where they came across 3 important figures: Ahiman, Shishai, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak. Upon returning home, the spies reported about the men they saw to Moses. Caleb, one of the spies, spoke up and said, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." But men who had gone up with him said, "We can't attack these people. They are stronger than we are." And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. They said, "The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." The descendants of Anak, otherwise known as the Anakim, were a race of people descendant from the original Nephilim. Whenever the Bible refers to the Anakim, they are associated with large stature, great size, or mighty strength. The people are greater and taller than we. The cities are great and fortified up to the sky. And moreover, we have seen the sons of Anakim there, a people great and many and tall as the Anakim. Who can stand before the sons of Anak? These people, along with other races of giants like the Rephites and Emim, dominated the land until Joshua and the Israelites utterly destroyed them with their cities. We can safely say that the Nephilim were a race of giant people, but the mystery only gets deeper and more twisted when we ask the question, where did the Nephilim come from? To answer this, we must return to the first appearance of the Nephilim in Genesis 6, 1-4, when human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them. The sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. The most commonly held view of the Nephilim's origin is that they are the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of humans. But the meaning of these two terms is hotly debated, especially the term sons of God. The phrase sons of God appears in the Hebrew Bible a total of 5 times. The first in Genesis 6, the second, third, and fourth in the book of Job, and the 5th in the book of Daniel. The appearances in the book of Job all seem to have one thing in common. The sons of God here seem to be some kind of angelic being. The Daniel passage uses the phrase "a son of God" and is mentioned as the 4th person in the fiery furnace with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, alluding to some form of angel, some even believing an early appearance of Christ himself. So it seems like the sons of God referred to in Genesis 6 were angelic beings. But how were angelic, immaterial servants of God marrying and sleeping with human women? Jesus himself says in the Gospel of Matthew, "For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like the angels in heaven." Some people say that Jesus' words refute the theory that the sons of God in Genesis are angels, because angels can't marry. But the key is in the last 2 words of the verse, "in heaven," implying that the angels in Genesis were fallen. The idea of fallen angels is supported by 2 very important New Testament Bible passages. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment, and the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling place, He has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day, just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, since they, in the same way as these angels, indulged in sexual perversion and went after strange flesh, they exhibited as an example in undergoing the punishment of eternal fire. Knowing that some angels did in fact fall from heaven and breed with humans, it makes sense that their offspring would be different, resulting in the monstrous size and might of the Nephilim and the giants that followed generations later. Though it's the most commonly held view of the Nephilim's origin, there is one problem in the theory. Listen carefully to the phrasing of these words. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of mankind. Some have taken this passage to say that the Nephilim were already on the earth before the fall of the angels. This would mean that they aren't the offspring of the fallen angels and humans. In fact, some go as far as to say that the author of Genesis, Moses, is specifically mentioning the Nephilim alongside the fallen angels to highlight the separation between the two groups. One theory is that the Nephilim were descendants of Seth, the faithful son of Adam, making them fine warriors and men of renown. Another theory suggests they were simply a genetic mutation which caused extreme growth. Are the Nephilim a race of demonic giants who terrorized nations for centuries, or were they simply large people?
On the first day, God said, "Let there be light," and there was. Theologians refer to that as creation by fiat. Fiat is a Latin word that means to command or to order. So God ordered the light to appear, and it did. And then God separated the light from darkness. He called the light day, and He called the darkness night, which tells us that the earth began to rotate on its axis on the very first day. On the second day, God created an atmosphere that was able to sustain life. Now, most people get confused when they read this part because the way that it's worded, we don't talk like that. And so we kind of get jumbled up as we're reading this passage of Scripture. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it very simple for you tonight. First of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read this passage of Scripture. But as I'm reading it, I'm going to substitute the word space for the word firmament, because that's actually a better translation. You see, the word firmament is actually translated from the Hebrew word rakia, and it's what we think of as space. That's why I'm going to substitute the word space for firmament. And then as I'm reading this passage, I'm actually going to stop at the end of each verse, and I'm going to illustrate what we just read on this whiteboard. So look at verses 6, 7, and 8, and remember that we're substituting the word space for the word firmament. And God said, "Let there be a space in the midst." Now, most of us don't use the word midst. What does that mean? Middle. And God said, "Let there be a space in the middle of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." Now, what does that mean? Well, if you were here last week, and if you weren't, I'm going to catch you up. The earth in the beginning was completely surrounded by water. There were no mountaintops that were peaking up. It was all water. There was no dry land anywhere. It's kind of like that movie Waterworld with Kevin Costner in it. Well, just kind of imagine, except there is no dry land anywhere. Now, I had a teenager come up to me last week and they said, "Well, if it was water like that, how did it stay around the earth?" And I said, "Well, it's the same way the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean stays around the earth. There's gravity there. So you have the earth, and this represents the earth, and all of this blue out here is the water. It was completely covered with water. And then God said, "Let there be space." And this space was in the middle of the waters. So what happened is there was a space that was created in the middle of the waters. Now I'm going to take out a little bit more. Let's do that so you can see. Does that make sense? And it divided the waters from the waters. Can everyone see that? Verse 7. And God made the space and divided the waters which were under the space, see that? From the waters which were above the space, and it was so. And God called the space, this part in here, heaven. And the evening and the morning were the second day. Now, most scholars believe that the water that was above the space actually turned into a vapor. So literally you had a canopy of water vapor around it. And this canopy actually protected the earth, and it made it very conducive to life. In fact, that's why so many of the patriarchs before Noah's flood lived for so long. They lived 700, 800, 900 years because you had this vapor around the earth. But I still want you to understand, at this point, on day 2, the earth is still completely covered with water. Does that make sense? So on the third day, what did God do? God created dry land upon the earth. Now, as I said, the earth in the very beginning was covered with water. There was no dry land. So what God did was He caused the mountains to rise and the valleys to sink, and the waters drained to the lower parts of the earth. Look at Psalms chapter 104, verses 5 through 9. It says, "You placed the world on its foundation so it would never be moved. You clothed the earth with floods of water, water that covered even the mountains." No dry land as of yet. "At your command, on the third day," I added that part, "the water fled at the sound of your thunder. It hurried away. Mountains rose and valleys sank to the levels you decreed. Then you set a firm boundary for the seas so they would never again cover the earth."
When God created man, He made him in the likeness of God. They were created, male and female. God blessed them and called them man. After he had lived 130 years, Adam had a son in his own likeness, and he named him Seth. Adam had other sons and daughters. Seth became the father of Enosh. Enosh became the father of Kenan. Kenan became the father of Mahalalel. Mahalalel became the father of Jared. Jared became the father of Enoch. Enoch became the father of Methuselah. Enoch pleased God and walked with him, and God brought him to heaven. Methuselah became the father of Lamech. Lamech had a son named Noah. Lamech said, "He will comfort us in the painful toil of our hands caused by the ground the Lord has cursed." Noah became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Noah means comfort. Man began to increase in numbers on the earth. God decided to limit lifespans to no more than 120 years. God saw how wicked man had become, and that man's inclination was continually towards evil. God said, "I will wipe mankind whom I have created from the face of the earth, men and animals, and creatures that move along the ground, and birds of the air, for I am grieved that I have made them." But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. This is the account of Noah. Noah was a righteous man and blameless among the people. He followed God with all his heart. Noah and his wife had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And God spoke to Noah, "I have decided to destroy all mankind, for the earth is filled with crime because of man. Yes, I will destroy mankind from the earth. Make a boat from resinous wood, sealing it with tar, and construct decks and stalls throughout the ship. Make it 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. Construct a skylight all the way around the ship, 18 inches below the roof, and make 3 decks inside the boat, a bottom, middle, and upper deck, and put a door in the side. Look, I am going to cover the earth with a flood and destroy every living being, Everything in which there is the breath of life will die. But I promise to keep you safe in the ship, with your wife and your sons and their wives. God instructed Noah, "Bring a pair of every animal, a male and a female, into the boat with you, to keep them alive throughout the flood. Bring a pair of each kind of bird, and animal, and reptile. Store away in the boat all the food that they and you will need." Noah did everything God commanded him. Then God instructed them to go into the ark. Genesis chapter 7, verses 2 and 3. Take with you 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal, a male and its mate, and 1 pair of every kind of unclean animal, a male and its mate, and also 7 pairs of every kind of bird, male and female, to keep their various kinds alive throughout the earth. And on the 7th day, waters of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened, and rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. For 40 days the roaring floods prevailed, covering the ground and lifting the boat high above the earth. As the water rose higher and higher above the ground, the boat floated safely upon it, until finally the water covered all the high mountains under the whole heaven, standing 22 feet and more above the highest peaks. And all living things upon the earth perished, birds, domestic and wild animals, and reptiles, and all mankind, everything that breathed and lived upon dry land. Every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out. Only Noah was left, and those with him in the ark. The waters flooded the earth for 150 days. But God remembered Noah and all that were with him in the ark. And he sent a wind over the earth, and the waters receded. The ark was aground for over 100 days when Noah sent out a raven. Why did you do that, Father? From the heights, the raven should be able to find dry land. If he comes back, we'll know that the waters haven't. No, Father. I meant, why did you send one of the ravens? We only have 2 of them, and if something happens to that one, next time I will send a dove. We have 7 of them. But the raven could only fly back and forth over the waters. A week later, why bother, Father? You sent the raven last week, and that didn't reveal anything. Yes, but I'm curious. I want to know what things are like outside, but I dare not risk opening that door. Another week. Do you think this will be the time, Father? One of these days, it will be. I know that. Look, there. It returns. Yes, Father, it does. But look, it carries something in its beak. An olive leaf. An olive leaf! Noah waited another week, and then, today, I have a feeling that this dove will not return. Oh, that bird has found a place to rest. I know it. We will still have a long wait, I think, before we will have dry enough ground for us and the animals. But no matter how long we wait now, it won't be as long as we waited for the ark to be completed, Father. 376 days after the Lord closed the door of the ark. I think it's time, sons. Today is the day we find out if the land is ready for us.
I know I'm ready for the land. Oh, Noah, look!
The surface of the ground was dry. Then God said, "Come out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons and their wives." Bring out every kind of living creature that is with you, the birds, the animals, and all the creatures that move along the ground, so they can multiply on the earth, and be fruitful and increase in number upon it. Sons, gather one of each of the clean animals. Why, Father? They will be offered to our God as a sacrifice. Now, a fire. Oh, a dove, Father!
The idea of a man building a giant boat to rescue humanity has been the subject of much interest, scrutiny, and ridicule throughout human history. And Noah and his ark have been represented in many different ways over the years. But what did the ark really look like? Does the Bible shed any light on the size or construction of the ark? How would it compare to the ships we have today? How could Noah possibly round up all the animals on the earth? Has Noah's ark been found? Is there any symbolism in the ark? All of these questions and more will be answered as we explore the Genesis account of Noah's ark. The account of Noah and the ark is one of the most widely known events in the history of mankind. Unfortunately, like other Bible accounts, in this day and age, it's often taken as mere fairy tale. However, truth, as they say, can often be stranger than fiction. For Bible-believing Christians, the Bible is the true history book of the universe, and it's in that light that the most asked questions about the ark and the flood of Noah can and should be answered with authority and confidence. And if we're to answer the critical questions of the day, let's make sure we're doing it from what the Bible actually says, not versus some straw man argument or popular misconception of the day. For example, most people will often confidently dismiss the account of Noah's Ark by simply stating there's no way Noah could have fit all the animals on the ark. And yet, when you ask them how many animals were needed to go on board, or if they know how big the ark was, they'll often plead ignorance, but then still reiterate, but there's still no way he could have done it. Which shows that they probably have some misconception about Noah's Ark and haven't thought through it deeply at all. Let's dive into this and get more specific, and let's begin with this question. Just how large was Noah's Ark? Well, unlike the many more whimsical drawings that often depict the ark as some kind of overgrown houseboat with giraffes sticking out of the top, the ark described in the Bible was a huge vessel. It was so large, in fact, that it wasn't likely until the late 1800s that another ship was built that exceeded the capacity of Noah's Ark. The key to understanding just how large it was comes directly from the Bible's account of God's commissioning Noah to create this huge craft. In Genesis 6:15, we read, "The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, its width 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits." Now, the word cubit, the primary unit of measure in the Old Testament, isn't one commonly used today. So understanding the length of a cubit is the key that gives us a good indication of the size we're talking about. The length of a cubit was based on the distance from the elbow to the fingertips, so it obviously varied between ancient people groups. But when Noah came off the ark, only one cubit measurement existed, the one that he had used to construct the ark. Now, the exact length of this cubit is unknown due to the effects of the Tower of Babel, where people scattered from one another and began using their own cubit. So it requires some logical guesswork to reconstruct the most likely length of the original cubit. Most ancient cultures ended up with two cubits, an older or royal cubit and a common or shorter cubit. Using an older cubit, which is the most likely cubit length in Noah's day, we can get a close estimate. One known and well-attested ancient royal cubit was at least 20.4 inches, so we know that the earth must have been no less than 510 feet long, 85 feet wide, and 51 feet high. Now, in the Western world, wooden sailing ships never got much longer than about 330 feet long. Yet the ancient Greeks had built vessels at least this size 2,000 years earlier. China built huge wooden ships in the 1400s that may also have been as large as the Ark. But the biblical Ark was one of the largest wooden ships of all time, even though it would be a mid-sized cargo ship by today's standards. But the common question for many skeptics and Christians alike is obvious. How could Noah have possibly built the Ark? To most people, the task of building the ship described in the Bible just seems overwhelmingly impossible. But again, before people dismiss the idea, they should look at what the Bible actually says. You see, the Bible doesn't tell us with wooden literacy that Noah necessarily built the ark all by himself. And as a matter of fact, the idea that he would have doesn't really make a lot of sense. When we see other accounts in the Bible, such as that Solomon built the temple, we don't actually believe he was the one doing the actual laying of every stone or building the physical structures himself, but that he designed and commissioned it to be built. Now, this isn't to say that Noah wasn't personally involved in the construction of the ark, but understanding that besides his sons helping, Noah could have hired skilled laborers or had relatives such as Methuselah and Lamech to help build the vessel. All that being said, based on an analysis from Scripture, Noah could have had between 55 to 75 years to build the ark. So, except for the fact that you wouldn't want to have to go back and repair work that had been done too many years previously, there's actually no reason to believe that Noah and his sons couldn't, or that they didn't, build the ship themselves in the time allotted. You see, despite what many might believe, there's no reason to think the physical strength or mental processes of men in Noah's day weren't at least as great as our own. There's actually compelling scientific evidence that the genomes of all living creatures are slowly degenerating due to the accumulation of slightly harmful mutations, which means the genetics of people in Noah's day were likely even far superior to ours today. They certainly would have had efficient means for harvesting and cutting timber, as well as for shaping, transporting, and erecting the massive beams and boards required. If one or two men today can erect a large house in just 12 weeks, how much more could 3 or 4 men do in a few years? After all, the Bible reveals Adam's descendants were making complex musical instruments, forging metal, and building cities. So their tools, machines, and techniques were not primitive. And history has shown that technology can be lost. In Egypt, China, and the Americas, it was often the earlier dynasties that built more impressive buildings or had finer art or better science than those who came later. For example, the ancient Maya were the first Mesoamerican civilization that built stone cities and astronomical observatories with a mastery of mathematics than the later groups like the Olmecs and Aztecs who came after them never surpassed. And we must recognize that many so-called modern inventions we have today are actually reinventions, like concrete, which was used masterfully by the Romans over 2,000 years ago. Even accounting for the possible loss of technology due to the flood, early post-flood civilizations would have possessed all of the engineering know-how necessary for a project like Noah's Ark. It's very reasonable to believe people were sawing and drilling wood in Noah's day only a few centuries before the Egyptians were sawing and drilling granite. The idea that more primitive civilizations are further back in time is an evolutionary concept. In reality, Scripture says when God created Adam, he was essentially perfect, the best physically and mentally that mankind has ever been. Today, the individual human intellect and physique has suffered from 6,000 years of sin and decay. The sudden rise in technology in the last few centuries has nothing to do with increasing intelligence. It's a combination of publishing and sharing ideas, and the spread of key inventions that became tools for investigation and manufacturing. One of the most recent and widespread tools, of course, is the computer, which may make us feel superior somehow to our ancestors, but is likely quite needed now, as it actually compensates a great deal for our natural decline in mental performance and discipline, since it permits us to gather and store information as perhaps never before. Now let's move on to one of the most common queries posed surrounding the idea of this floating wooden zoological masterpiece that almost always comes up, and answer this question. So how could Noah round up so many animals? And of course, you'll often hear a follow-up question after it, something like, are you saying Noah had to travel to Australia and get some kangaroos and koalas? Followed by a chuckle or two. But once again, let's start by checking to see what the biblical text actually claims before we make our analysis. In Genesis 6:20, we read, of the birds after their kind, of animals after their kind, and of every creeping thing of the earth after its kind. 2 of every kind will come to you to keep them alive. This verse contains a critical key concept in answering the question, because it tells us that Noah didn't have to set out and search or travel to faraway places to bring the animals on board. Thinking it through, with the devastation a global flood would have wrought, the world map would have been completely different before the flood. There would have been no Australia, Iceland, or Africa, for example. None of the continents we have today. And on the basis of Genesis 1:9 and Psalm 104:8-9, there actually may have been only one continent in the beginning. According to the scriptures, there was a call by the Creator. The animals were sent to Noah and simply arrived at the ark as if called by a homing instinct, some kind of behavior implanted in the animals by God. And presumably, they would have marched up the ramp all by themselves. Though this was probably a supernatural event, which means that it's one that we can't explain by our understanding of nature, when we compare it to the impressive migratory behavior we see in some animals today, it's easily understandable. We are still far from comprehending all the marvelous animal behaviors exhibited in God's creation. The migration of Canada geese and other birds, the amazing flight of monarch butterflies, the annual travels of whales and fish like salmon, hibernation instincts, earthquake sensitivity, and countless other fascinating capabilities of God's animal kingdom. But remember, answering the objection people pose against the account of the ark should be dealt with according to what the scripture plainly says. But what about dinosaurs? Were dinosaurs on the ark? You see, when people begin to realize that the Bible's account of the ark isn't as full of holes as they originally thought, they often begin to bring out their big guns of doubt, asking what they consider to be the toughest questions of all. And the topic of dinosaurs certainly looms large among them. Now, dinosaurs are a subject that bring up all sorts of questions that we simply don't have time to get into here today. But what we'll do is deal with as much of them as we need in order to discuss them in context of Noah's Ark. So we'll begin by going back to the biblical text. Now, the history of God's creation, told in Genesis 1 and 2, tells us that all land-dwelling creatures were made on day 6 of creation week, the same day God made Adam and Eve. Therefore, it's clear, without influence from sources outside of Scripture, that dinosaurs, being land animals, were made along with man. Also, 2 of every kind, 7 of some, of land animals boarded the ark, and nothing indicates that any of the land animals were already extinct before the flood. Besides, the description of the behemoth in chapter 40 of the book of Job, and of course Job lived after the flood and the dispersal of the animals from the ark after it landed, only fits with something like a sauropod dinosaur. So the close ancestors of behemoth must have been on board the ark. We also find many dinosaurs that were trapped and fossilized in sedimentary rocks laid down by the Great Flood, that is, in flood sediment. And from people groups around the world, widespread legends of encounters with what people refer to generically as dragons give another strong indication that representative dinosaur kinds survived the flood. And obviously, the only way this could have happened is if they were on the ark. Of course, when speaking about dinosaurs and the ark with people, you can almost see the questions tumbling around in their head and that inevitably come out. But what about how big they were? Even though the ark was huge, could it really have housed giant dinosaurs? Well, juveniles of even the largest land animals wouldn't present a size problem, and being young, they'd have their full breeding life ahead of them. And despite our fascination with the more giant types depicted in museums, popular movies, and books, most dinosaurs weren't very large at all. Most scientists agree that the average size of a dinosaur is actually the size of a bison. So many were smaller, and of course some were bigger. For example, God most likely brought Noah 2 young adult sauropods, like apatosaurs, or similar to what I knew of as a brontosaurus when I was a kid, rather than 2 full-grown sauropods. And the same goes for the elephant kind, the giraffe kind, and other animals that grow to be very large. However, there was adequate room for most fully grown adult animals anyway. And as far as the number or different types of dinosaurs, it should be recognized that although there are hundreds of names for different varieties or species of dinosaurs that have been discovered, there are probably only about 60 to 80 actual different kinds. Think of them like many popular kids shows describe them. There's the long necks and the spiky ones and the sharp-toothed ones with beaks and horns. But just like we see variations in all creatures, like for example, the dog kind today, we see Chihuahuas and Great Danes, Poodles and Pyrenees, Canadian Eskimo dogs. They're just all dogs, even though they vary in shape and size quite a bit. So as we can begin to see, having room to house all of the animals Noah needed to take wasn't the problem many people think it would have been. And we'll explore the specifics of that even more a little later on. But for now, let's examine the full scope of this terrifying judgment that deluged the earth. And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds and cattle and beasts, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and every man. All in whose nostrils was the breath of the Spirit of life, all that was on the dry land, died. Genesis 7:21-22. So the question that often follows when contemplating this verse is, but how could a flood destroy every living thing? Well, the Bible makes it clear that Noah's flood was much more destructive than any 40-day rainstorm ever would be, even though just a 3-day heavy rainfall today can cause major catastrophic effects on the local terrain and wildlife where it occurs. But the flood event went well beyond torrential rainfall. When the scripture says that the fountains of the great deep broke open, in other words, it's easy to understand earthquakes, volcanoes, and geysers of molten lava and scalding water were squeezed out of the Earth's crust in a violent, explosive upheaval. These fountains were not stopped until 150 days into the flood, so the Earth was literally churning underneath the waters for about 5 months. Continental shifting was occurring until the mountains were lifted up into their approximate current places. There's still some residual mountain building and continental shifting occurring today as a result. The duration of the flood was extensive, and an analysis of the text shows Noah and his family were aboard the ark for around a year. For those that struggle to understand how the flood could be so destructive, a quick internet search with keywords like flash flood reveals hours of footage of how utterly devastating moving water can be. Relatively recent local floods, volcanoes, and earthquakes, though clearly devastating to life and land, are tiny in comparison to the worldwide catastrophe that destroyed and reshaped the world that then existed, as 2 Peter 3:6 describes. Noah's flood accomplished what it had been sent to do. All land animals and people not on board the ark were destroyed in the floodwaters, per Genesis 7:21-23. And the result was the billions of animals preserved in the great fossil record we see today.
May God richly bless you. Goodbye for now.